freedom's the answer. What's the question? You're listening to Ernest Hancock.
Yeah, what we fighting for here on Declare Your Independence with me, Ernest Hancock, each and every day on the LRN.FM network out of New Hampshire. You know, I want to make sure that you know that here in Arizona, we've had a long-time relationship and good friends with, you know, someone that you wouldn't think would be as supportive of this anarchist, no-compromise, libertarian kind of, you know, thing. And, you know, someone in the gun community, a lot of times they align themselves with the Republicans or the NRA, and they get their marching orders from the BATF or something like that. Now, the owner of Crossroads of the West, Bob Templeton, has always been fair-minded. He's been open. He's been very generous, and he's all about the freedom and the love. So it's my pleasure to have Bob Templeton on to share some things with us. I got you there, Bob?
Yeah, we're here.
You know, Bob, I wanted to make sure there's a few things, and we'll go ahead and list some of the things that we're going to be talking about. Of course, the Tucson shooting in the media last weekend. You had I was down there at the Tucson gun show that you have, and man, there was a lot of media. There was television cameras from everywhere. And we'll talk about that. We'll talk about, well, this starts bringing back things like the gun show loophole. Now, that's private individuals just being able to sell their firearms to anybody else. It's like, you know, I got a hammer. You want a hammer? Here's a hammer. You know, so we'll talk about that and how that's issues come back up. We have California had fingerprint on handgun ammo as part of legislation that they had, and that was recently struck down by the court. You were telling me about that, so I definitely want to talk about that. We have pending federal legislation, and then Obama on gun control, because let's do that one first, because over the years, certainly in the last couple of years since Obama, even when he was running for office, and then now that he's president, we have people from the progressive side that has come up and said, you know, you guys, you bunch of gunnies, you're always worried, Obama doesn't want to take your guns. Nah, that's not an issue. You know, go back to sleep. Don't worry about it. Gun control is not on Obama's list. And I'm going, yeah, right up until it is. Is it on his list, Bob? What do you think?
Absolutely it is, but they have recognized that it's not politically expedient to talk about it, so they quietly are working behind the scenes. Not the administration directly, but indirectly with members of Congress who are the so-called progressives, the people who want to regulate, restrict, and eventually eliminate our right to use firearms in America. They're all working together to restrict our rights further. We'll talk a little bit more about that with the legislation that's pending. But make no mistake about it, the Justice Department under Eric Holder, and the Eric Holder reports directly to President Obama. The agenda is still regulate, restrict, and eventually eliminate the private ownership of firearms in America.
Why? I mean, what is their motivation for that? Is it just a political voting block thing, or they got bigger plans?
Well, they recognize it's part of the progressive agenda. No one needs firearms. We'll talk a little bit about what we ran into in Tucson, particularly with the international media last weekend. They just could not hardly believe that we could own and use firearms in America without restrictions, because, of course, in Germany and Japan, where the two media folks were from that I was interviewing with, you can't own firearms as a private citizen there. And so they could hardly believe we could own firearms, much less shoot them and use them. Interesting little sidebar story there. We were near the Pima County gun range when we had the gun show at the fairgrounds last weekend, where you were, and somebody let loose several bursts of automatic weapons fire over there, and the interviewer from Japan said, "What was that noise?" And I said, "That was the sound of freedom." "What do you mean, the sound of freedom? It sounded like a machine gun to me." And I said, "Yeah, it was a machine gun. We can own those over here." They could not hardly believe that we had the freedom to own and use any kind of firearms, much less machine guns. So, interesting interview, and interesting. But the international agenda for socialist groups, and particularly the progressive or liberal groups here in U.S., is to regulate and restrict ownership of firearms. Your question was why? Ultimately, in the final analysis, people who are armed are much more difficult to persuade, if you will, to adopt their political philosophy.
Yeah, it's all about control. Yeah. It's like the bumper sticker. Gun control is about control. And we go way back. You remember when we were doing the initiative for concealed carry here in the '90s, and we would have our little libertarian gypsy booth out there all the time and everything. And I remember it was right after the Brady bill. And you're right, it was the Japanese and Germans. And I remember it was a Japanese television crew for their version of like 60 Minutes that came out and they interviewed us. And the big thing, they could not believe that post-Brady bill, that you had people walking around with dowel rods in their AR-15 with a sign on it saying, X amount of dollars, buy my rifle, and anybody could just buy it. And they were just taken aback by it. And the conversation went something like this. I go, the people of Japan need to understand that our form of government is not about the government or the collective. It is about the government protecting the rights of the individual. And the individual right to self-defense and defense of your rights against a tyrannical government is the foundation of the Bill of Rights, blah, blah, blah. And you go, that's not going to make it on the airwaves. Because that is just so opposite to what it is that they're trying to portray. And that is exactly 15, 20 years later, we're looking at an administration that wants us just to comply. So it becomes pretty simple for us to understand what's going on in that light. Well, let's go ahead and talk about the California fingerprint. I didn't even know that this had actually become legislation. Tell me about it.
Yeah, it started out in the Assembly in California last year, and it was named Assembly Bill 962, and it was sponsored by Representative Kevin De Leon from Los Angeles. Basically, an attempt to restrict ammo sales and it required anyone who was going to sell handgun ammunition to register with the state and to keep records to do actual fingerprint and government photo identification for anyone that bought handgun ammo. Well, huge problem administratively to be able to even keep track of those. Every other state or local government agency that's tried these kinds of things before gives them up almost immediately because they have little or no value to law enforcement, and it creates a huge paperwork burden. At any rate, they managed to pass it through the Democrat-controlled legislature and the Democrat-controlled Senate in the state of California, and it was to go into effect on February 1st.
Well, did Schwarzenegger sign it?
And Schwarzenegger signed it. Yes. Schwarzenegger did sign it, and I suppose that's another story about politics of Governor Schwarzenegger. But at any rate, he signed it, and it was to become law on February 1st. The NRA and the California Rifle and Pistol Association challenged them in court in Fresno, California, and basically we won. The judge struck down the law, said it was unconstitutional because it was vague, did not define handgun ammunition clearly, and there were several other factors that made it unconstitutional. So it's gone, and so we won't be dealing with that law on the 1st of February. Now, will they come back? Of course they will. They'll try to rewrite it and make it acceptable and try to ram it through the legislature again, because we have a Democrat-controlled legislature, both houses, in California. But we don't think it'll go very far because Governor Larry Brown's the new governor.
Well, when we come back here on Declare Your Independence with Bob Templeton, owner of Crossroads of the West Gun Show, the big gun show, thousands of vendor tables. I mean, huge, humongous, major. Oh, he's been doing this for a long time. We're going to talk about federal attempts to restrict your gun rights when we come back.
Uncovering the secrets and exposing the lies. That's what readers of freedomsphoenix.com get every day. Readers of freedomsphoenix.com are constantly provided the information that detail the real news between the lines of propaganda about government policies and the true relationship we all have with coercive governments. Learn the true condition of our economy, innovations and technological breakthroughs in energy, health, computer science, and space travel. Learn the truth well before it's admitted to in the lamestream media, the media that is so last century. Corporate media has evolved into nothing more than distributors of government propaganda, but we now have a fantastic alternative. FreedomsPhoenix.com provides constant news updates on the issues that affect our lives in the most important ways. Our liberty and our property are under constant attack, and FreedomsPhoenix.com provides the understanding behind the propaganda while encouraging the participation of our readers. Join us at FreedomsPhoenix.com. That's freedoms with an S, Phoenix.com. FreedomsPhoenix.com, where the revolution between the ears has already matured.